On this episode of Cinema Disaster, we're going to be talking about the 1986 film Trick or Treat. It was directed by Charles Martin Smith, who played Terry in American Graffiti. American Graffiti, as you know, was directed by George Lucas, who you know from Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Howard the Duck. Charles Martin Smith also plays the principal, Mr. Wembley, in this film. And for anybody who, grew up in the 80s like I did during what was called the satanic panic of the 80s, and I realize in 2019 that sounds completely ridiculous, but that was actually a thing called the satanic panic of the 80s where, you had all these like religious organizations and parents and, I don't know, people were just coming down on like heavy metal music like Ozzy Osbourne and Kiss, and then you had like Slayer and all that stuff. I always grew up, hearing that Kiss stood for Knights in Satan's Service, and AC/DC stood for After Christ Devil Comes. And as a kid, seeing this on the news all the time, these were things that I never questioned until obviously I got older and I realized how ridiculous this sounded. But this movie makes a lot of fun out of that time period and out of that whole ideology. I mean, this movie plays up every stereotype that you can think of about heavy metal or rock and roll being devil's music. This movie stars Mark Price, who you probably know as Skippy from Family Ties. He plays a guy by the name of Ragman. Well, that's his nickname. His name in the film is Eddie Weinbauer. And he's this big metalhead who is obsessed with this rock and roller named Sammy Kerr. And he feels like Sammy Kerr went to the same high school that Ragman went to. And now, Sammy Kerr is this big metal star or rock star or whatever you want to call it. And Ragman feels like that Sammy Kerr's music speaks to him. He feels like he's the only one that understands him because Sammy Kerr was pushed out and kicked out for his ideas and kind of picked on for being who he was when he went to the school. And he in Ragman's mind, Sammy Kerr rose above it. And now he's on top and he can just look down at the anthill and smile, So Ragman, he gets picked on in this movie pretty mercilessly by a group of jocks or I guess popular people or whatnot, which we'll get to that in a minute. So what happens is that Sammy Kerr ends up dying in a hotel fire at the age of 38, and this completely devastates Weinbauer. So he goes to see his friend Nuke, who is actually played by Gene Simmons from Kiss, who's a DJ down at the local radio station. Gene Simmons was actually offered the role of Sammy Kerr for this film, but he didn't really like the script that much, so he passed on it. The role of Sammy Kerr was also offered to Blackie Lawless from the band Wasp. But it eventually went to a dance choreographer by the name of Tony Fields, who did a lot of the dance choreography in this film as well as a lot of other popular music videos of the 80s. Anyway, Nuke ends up giving Weinbauer or Ragman, an unreleased copy of the final album that Sammy Kerr released. And the album is called Songs in the Key of Death. And he tells him that it's the only copy in existence and that he's going to let him have it. It's kind of funny because he's like, what does he say? He says, what you have in your hand is the only copy in existence. And he's like, oh, and you're giving this to me? And he's like, and then I think Nuke says, Oh, I'm going to play it on Halloween. I have it on cassette over there. Well, anyway, Weinbauer takes this record home and he finds out that if he plays it backwards, that he can speak to Sammy Kerr from beyond the grave. And Kerr gives him all of these ideas about how to get back at these people that are bullying him. And basically, I guess him and Kerr, the spirit of Sammy Kerr, go into this like pact or this deal to get revenge on these people that have been fucking with Weinbauer. Doug Savant plays Tim Haney in this film, who is the main antagonist or the main bully that bullies Weinbauer. You might know Doug Savant from movies like Teen Wolf or Maniac Cop 3, but he plays the stereotypical 80s blonde-haired bully, much in the vein of Johnny Lawrence from The Karate Kid. And he kind of has like a group of people that hang with him that give shit to Weinbauer. There's a girl that runs in Tim Haney's group named Leslie Graham, who's played by Lisa Orgolini, and she's very much a good person. She's not an antagonist, although she runs with the antagonist. I mean, some watching this might say she's guilty by association, but she never gives shit to Weinbauer. Matter of fact, she invites him to this after-school like party or whatever at the school, and it's in like the swimming pool complex or whatever. And Tim Haney basically tries to kill Weinbauer. He puts like a weight in like his backpack and throws him in the pool, and Ragman can't get up. But it's Leslie Graham that jumps in and saves him. Although, at first, Ragman thinks that Leslie set him up. And he's really upset about that. And this is sort of like the tipping point of where he wants to get back at these people. You know, as he says, you know, he doesn't know where, he doesn't know how, but he's going to nail all of them. And he ends up realizing that Leslie did not set him up, and that she had no idea that these guys were going to treat him that way. And they become friends, and she becomes someone who ends up helping him when Sammy Kerr escapes the record and kind of wreaks havoc on the town. He has a best friend by the name of Roger, who is also a metal fan and is definitely by his side through this whole way, and he definitely helps him as well. There's all these like backmasked messages on this Sammy Kerr album that he discovers, and I remember growing up in the 80s hearing about backmasking and backwards messages and all this stuff. And I remember one time me and my friend Tim played Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven backwards because we heard there was a message in it. And what we heard was, "Here's to my sweet sad Satan. There's power in 666. Out back in the tool shed, we wwere tortured," or something like that. But we knew that that was the message that we were supposed to hear. So really, it's just like garbled, like nonsense if you play it backwards. But if you're told what to hear, then you'll hear that. And you know, it's one of the oldest tricks in the book from record labels. You know, put back messages. The Beatles did it, or you know, all these bands did it. You know, put backwards messages in your albums, and then the kids will go home and try to find these messages, and they'll fuck their albums up when they play them backwards, and then they got to go buy a new one. You know, it's the oldest trick in the marketing book. But you know, and if there's not backwards messages, you know, they'll start rumors or people will imagine shit. But the funny thing about it was when we did this backwards Led Zeppelin message, the doorbell rang. And it was like 3 in the morning. My friend Tim's like, "I'm out of here." And I'm like, "Fuck that, you're not leaving now." I mean, it definitely, even though I don't believe in that stuff, it definitely was one of those moments in my 20s that I was kind of freaked out. And I definitely didn't want him to leave. The music for Sammy Kerr in this film was provided by the band Fastway. who features Fast Eddie Clark from Motorhead. It's Pete Way from UFO, and then Dave King on vocals, who at the time was relatively unknown, but he went on to be the singer for the Celtic punk band Flogging Molly, who was really popular, I would say, late 90s, early 2000s, and actually still fairly popular now. The special effects were done by Kevin Yeager, who also did the effects on what I consider to be the best Friday the 13th film ever, Friday the 13th Final Chapter. He also did the special effects for Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and, again, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, that being one of the best Nightmare on Elm Street movies. There's a really great scene in this movie that had a huge impact on me at a young age. It's very, very powerful, but it's when Tim Haney's character comes to Ragman's house and warns him to stay away from him and his girlfriend, because Ragman had given him a Sammy Kerr tape, and she ends up getting like attacked by this like demon entity or whatever in the back of this car, and she ends up in the hospital. And so Tim Haney's freaking out, and he comes to the house, and he's yelling, you know, for Weinbauer to come out, and he's completely pissed. And Weinbauer comes out with this like this evil look in his eye, and he tries to run at him, and then Weinbauer like puts his hand up like this, and then there's these jack-o'-lanterns on the front porch, and the flames like shoot up from them, and Weinbauer is just standing there like this, and Tim Haney's like, "You're getting into some pretty weird shit, man. You just stay the fuck away from me. You know, you did something to that tape. You know, you know, I don't know. It's just like this whole that image, that scene is burned into my psyche from when I was a child. And I don't know if it would be as powerful now as it was, you know, like if I saw it for the first time as an adult. But as a kid, that was something that had a huge impact. I also want to talk about Ozzy Osbourne making a cameo in this film as the Reverend Gilstrom, who's trying to he's on a moral crusade to stop heavy metal music because he thinks that of this, you know, it's morally corrupting the young because there's sexually suggestive lyrics, and he thinks they're evil people. So I also want to address the DVD cover right here, which has Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne on it, which obviously is not the original cover. This is the original cover. So you got Sammy Kerr with the guitar, and he's holding up the his fist or whatever, and he's in this like ring of fire or whatnot. And you know, you got the demon up in the corner, and you know, I don't know. I assume they went with this cover to try and sell more copies. I found this at Walmart for like $5 in the $5 bin, which is a complete insult to the film because it's definitely worth more than $5. But I mean, if you've never seen this and you want to own it, you can find it for really cheap on the internet. You might even be able to find it on YouTube. I'm not sure. But this is a must-see. If you grew up in the 80s with any of the heavy metal music, or are still a heavy metal fan, or if you grew up during the Satanic Panic, and this will bring back a lot of memories of that for you. And if you want to see something really fun, you know, if you're into movies that take place on Halloween or whatnot, you know, I mean, this movie has a lot to offer. And I guess I'll be coming back probably next time you see me. We'll be doing it'll be another review with Sam, guest hosting. I'm not exactly sure what movie we're going to do yet. We've discussed it, but I guess you'll find out as soon as I do. So check out Trick or Treat, and until next time, keep watching.
Oh, bear these tidings to great Lucifer. Say Faustus doth surrender up his soul, so he will spare him 24 years, to give me whatsoever I shall ask, to tell me whatsoever I demand, to slay mine enemies, and aid my friends, and always be obedient to my will.